Welcome, Benoît Felten. You well know for many interested in broadband rollout and so on. You have focused and talk about smart city. What are your definition of smart city?
A smart city is a city that uses modern technology and particularly communication technology to rethink and redefine what the city is and how it interacts with the different stakeholders in the city, whether they're citizens, businesses, the administration, the politicians, the tourists, people who don't live in the city but come in the city. So all of these relationships can be rethought and maybe made either better or more efficient through the use of technology. So a smart city would be a city that really embraces that and goes all the way. Now, having said that, I'm not super happy with the terminology because there's really a question that it raises, at which point do you become smart? You know, where does it stop, right? And are cities that are not doing it dumb cities? No, not really. So I like to talk about connected communities, which I think is a better, more neutral description, but it's the same concept really.
But to be able to be a connected city, community, what tools you need to have to collaborate with?
Well, the first thing is the city needs to understand how it can rethink itself. And a lot of cities, to be honest, that I meet and talk to are not there yet in terms of the thought process. So the first step is this rethinking, and that's really about understanding what's key to the different stakeholders, what's key to the citizens, and work on that and how you can make that better. But once that is done, one of the issues that I raised this morning is that a lot of these enhancements are made on a project-by-project basis without any kind of transverse strategy. And one of the issues there is that you keep replicating infrastructure assets in particular, but also IT assets for each of these projects. Whereas in fact, having a common infrastructure platform to power all of these would be a lot more cost effective and a lot more future-proof as well.
And how will you describe the situation in Europe, or will it be too spread between different situations?
Well, and that's the thing is a lot of what we hear about, there are some really cool experiences and projects out there, but a lot of what we hear about is one application, if I can call it that, in one city and another one in another city, etc. I don't know that I could point to a city today that really has a unified approach and a roadmap of applications going forward. I think the thought process isn't quite there yet.
To be able to be smart or connective or be future-proof in somewhere, you need broadband. How would you describe the broadband situation in Europe?
Well, the issue is that a lot of these applications are going to require some kind of access product, be it wireline or wireless. But we have to remember that wireless is wireline effectively for 95% of the path. It's only wireless at the very end. And actually, very few cities have access and control over a high-speed ubiquitous network. So, in other words, if the quality of broadband isn't good, that's bad enough to begin with. But even if the quality of broadband is good and you can't access that broadband as a city on financial terms that are viable, you still can't make anything. And I think a big part of the problem is that the operators don't see this as a market they should pursue, so the pricing models are just completely unaligned with what a city needs to make this work. And that's why I think cities should consider deploying their own infrastructure, not necessarily just because they think their citizens are not having good enough broadband, but also because for their own needs, they are going to need very good performance networks. And they're going to have to be able to access these at a really, really low level. Just to give you an example, there's an application that is being trialed in some cities where security cameras in the cities could be accessed by policemen on their smartphones in real time. So if you're a policeman and you're in a situation where you don't want to be seen but you need to observe, you could be 300 meters away and have a live feed of a security camera to see exactly what the situation is. Well, if you think of that in terms of broadband capabilities, it means you need very high-speed wireless both ways for this to work, and it's actually not available in most cities today. And 4G offers, if they exist, are either not fast enough, or they're not in the whole city, or the latency isn't good enough. I mean, when you think about these things, you can't say, oh well, if the network's not good enough, too bad, he's not going to do it this time. That's not how police works, right? So it's really a different way of thinking about it.
Which have the responsible, the telecom operator or the politician, or?
I don't think it's a matter of being responsible. The telecom operators are private businesses, and they're running their business as they think is best. And that means that you don't put products everywhere because there are markets that are less profitable than others. I understand that. I don't think it's fundamentally wrong. But I do think that as a city, you cannot afford to be delivering good service to half your citizens and bad service to the other half. So if the market won't provide as a city, you need to find solutions. And if that means investing in your own assets, then I think that's what you have to do. And then it becomes the politicians' problems.
You're looking around the whole world and different examples and how things. What is your opinion, the common thing for successful cities or countries?
I think the one of the things that I stressed this morning that is very important to me is what I called political sanity. I think that infrastructure decisions of this magnitude cannot be taken by partisan, in a partisan way. Basically, both or multiple sides of the political spectrum need to agree on the necessity of infrastructure building, because otherwise there's no continuity. We have examples of cities in Europe where one side voted the network in, and as soon as the other side came in, they stopped deploying it. You need continuity for these things. And the problems that we've seen in Australia recently come exactly from that problem. It wasn't a business proposition or an infrastructure proposition to begin with. It was a political project. And so when the political opponents come in, they have to change the project. It's the nature of politicians. So we need, I think, a little bit of consensus and political sanity around these issues. Otherwise, we're getting nowhere. I often wonder, you know, looking at how it happens now, I think, how did we ever get electricity deployed? And I don't really have the answer. I don't understand what the political process was back then to invest that much money, public money, into deploying an electricity network. And I mean, the cost of deploying the electricity network was 100 times what the cost of deploying broadband is today. So you know, I really wonder, why are we in a situation now where building a new road or stadium or tunnel is not a problem? Nobody even looks at it, but building a broadband network is suddenly so complicated as a city. I don't really have the answer. It's something that makes me wonder a lot.
What do you would it be able to do something about it? And then do you think Europe will lack and coming behind all other parts, or?
Well, I think Europe is lagging behind. I mean, we're lucky here to be in probably the exception in Europe, but the fact is that Europe is lagging behind. And I think the core issue is it goes down to the liberalization in the late 80s and early 90s. I think that politicians at the time did not realize that this was a business where infrastructure and services were actually separate. And it was hard to understand at the time because it seemed like service was only telephony. But as soon as the internet started being deployed and we had a multi-service platform effectively in place, then suddenly we had a problem because that separation didn't exist. In railways, in electricity, in water, there is a separation between the network that carries and the services that are offered. And I think we need that both for competition reasons, but also for infrastructure companies to be able to look at investment horizons that are beyond 5 years. Because right now, as a telecom company, you won't invest into anything that doesn't make money within 5 years.
What do you think must happen, what's happened to this change will going to be realized, and what do you think the benefit will be if it's realized?
So the first question is very complicated because the incumbent operators do not want to be structurally separated, and they are lobbying with a lot of money in Brussels to make sure that that topic is never even discussed. So I don't quite know, to be honest with you, at this point in time, what needs to happen for that to change. I think partly we need to find a way to educate the politicians and even the Commission into the benefits. The benefits would be essentially at two levels. They would solve two fundamental problems that we have in Europe. The first problem is that we have uneven competition in most countries, where basically the incumbent operator is still by far the dominant player because he owns both the network and the services that run over the network. And even though in many countries he's forced to open that network, he does it in ways that still favor him. And that's an absolute fact, and any competitive operator around Europe knows that. The second thing, which is what concerns me the most right now, is that the only way that historically we got networks that went everywhere was because we had a fully integrated company that had the obligation to cover everything. And the way they did that was by taking money of the areas that didn't cost a lot but brought a lot of money to finance the areas that cost a lot and don't necessarily bring a lot of money. Right now, we're in a model where effectively, even if incumbents are deploying fiber to the home, they're doing it only where they want and where they know they're going to make a profit, which means that everywhere else, we're never, ever going to see anything. And the key benefit we would get out of structural separation is the renewed ability of a unified infrastructure company to do this slowly, but, you know, full expansion and full coverage to get ubiquitous service with next generation access. We're not going to get it any other way, I think.
What advice will you give a city who want to have better broadband connectivity situation?
Well, I mean, I think there's maybe one fundamental difference between when Stokab launched its service back in '94 and now. That is that back then a private player would never have played with Stokab. Some were happy to be customers of Stokab, but they wouldn't have partnered to deploy the network. I think now a lot more private partners understand that working collaboratively with government is a good model, and it's a way to get infrastructure deployed, at least at a local level. So my advice to cities would be structure a model where the financing that you put in the project is really structured to make it worthwhile for a private partner to work with you, but to work with you on your terms. In other words, deploy everywhere, give the same quality of service to every citizen, and make sure that the structure remains open for competition to thrive. I think that's really the key element. And I think it is possible to do this today with some private funding as well, whereas 15 years ago, I think that was impossible.
You have been here some days with Fibre to the Home conference and conference today. What do you say was, for you, the highlights during this day?
Well, the first thing that I find interesting is it's the first of these conferences that happens in a country where fiber really is mature. And today it's about half of the broadband market. And we see that DSL is going down and fiber is going up. So the market is really caught on what is happening. So first of all, I really liked the atmosphere of the event this year. It was a lot more positive and a lot more you know, let's go forward than maybe in some of the previous years where, and I'm, you know, I'm the first one to complain when things don't go the way they should, but there was very little of that this year. I think the other thing, and this is the value of this event for me, is it doesn't just attract people from Europe. People come from all over the world, not just to listen, but also to show what they're doing, and getting this diversity of experience to be demonstrated. It gives us some really interesting ideas. And typically, one thing that I find fascinating is that we're starting to see that the emerging markets, in many ways, are smarter than we are. And they're finding solutions to the same problems we've had for 10 years, but they're actually doing something about it. And that, to me, is really fascinating. And similarly, this morning, hearing from Singapore in detail by someone who is in the middle of it, it's really a great thing to experience.
Thank you for taking your time to come to Stockholm.
You're welcome.